Good morning, everyone. My name is Crispin White, Member Services Manager at the Chamber and Economic Development of the Rutland Region. And I would, thank you very much. And I would like to thank you all for joining us this morning. To kick this program off, it's my pleasure to introduce the CEDRR Board President to get us going, Mr. Russ Marsan.
Thank you, Crispin. First of all, I guess thanking our sponsors, Omnia, for putting this together today. So thanks very much. Round of applause for Omnia. And then, of course, all the representatives here to my left, which I'll name, and maybe hold all the applause. You guys can stand, and at the end, I'll give you all a standing ovation. How's that sound? This is where I need my glasses, though. I'm not like Lyle. He knows them all right by heart, so. All right, here we go. I'm sorry I have to read it off the paper, but bear with me. Vermont Senate, David Weeks. Please stand up, David. Vermont General Assembly, Terry Williams. Vermont Rep, Chris Pritchard. Vermont Senate, Brian Collamore. Vermont Rep, Alicia Millay. Vermont Rep, Christopher Howland. Vermont Rep, David Bosch. Vermont Rep, Tom Burdett. Representative Todd Nielsen, Representative Bill Cantfield, and Representative Chris Keyser. You guys all want to stand or no stand? Or? Yeah, you guys usually do your big spotlight. Oh, and Representative Patty. Sorry, you didn't. For some reason, they must have left the diamond off the list. That was a good one not to miss, huh? Thanks. We'll tune that up next time. Of course, then we want to make sure that we introduce the staff, so all the folks that are working hard behind the scenes to get all these things done here in Rutland County and working with you all to make those things happen. So I'd like to introduce Shasta Matino, who's the Interim Executive Director in Finance and Compliance. So Shasta's over there. You guys all know the big guy, Crispin White, Member Services Manager. Olivia Buxbaum, who is Communications and Marketing. Dominique Winters. Dominique is now Office and Events Manager. Give it up for Dominique. Matt Britt. Matt is Community Growth Manager at the Hub. And Sarah Pelkey. And Sarah is the new Economic Development that just came on board very recently. So, and I don't know if Sarah's here. I haven't seen her this morning. No, she wasn't able to make it, so. All right, well, I guess those are all the introductions, so now I'll do the biggest introduction. Senator Collamore is going to come up here, and he's going to introduce our guest speakers for the day and say a few words of wisdom, like he always does.
So, I want to start off by congratulating our Olympians, right? Hopefully you all got a chance to see both the men's and the women's hockey teams play. Identical overtime 2-1 victories over Canada, but we had 33 medals overall. We did very, very well this year over in Italy, so I just wanted to mention that. I happen to be fortunate enough to have been at the 1980 games in Lake Placid for the Russian American game. That was not the gold medal game. A lot of people think that was the last game. They had to play, I think it was Finland later to win the gold. So, but that was back in those days, I don't know how it happened, because there's only 5,000 seats in that arena. The Center Street Saloon, which is where Carrie Nations used to be, and now I don't even know what it is. It's still open and doing something wonderful, I'm sure. But we chartered a bus to go up there, and we had 2 kegs in the aisle of that bus going up. So by the time we got there, we were pretty well happy. We got lubricated. So it's my pleasure to introduce a couple of our guest speakers today. Amy Spear, who's president of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, and Megan Sullivan, who's vice president of government affairs. Amy's been a key driver of legislative reforms benefiting Vermont's tourism and hospitality industries, and is deeply committed to strengthening the state's business community and economic growth. And yes, there are folks up in the legislature that care about business. I want you to know that. Megan leads the Vermont Chamber statewide policy and advocacy efforts at the State House, representing employers of all sizes and sectors as legislative priorities take shape. So we're just a week away from the town meeting break, which typically indicates we're about halfway through the session. And when we come back at the end of the week following town meeting, that Friday is crossover day, which means all the bills have to have left one chamber and sent over to the other chamber in order for the other chamber to start working on them. So we're about halfway through, and in my view, and this is my 12th year there has not been any significant issue yet in terms of what bills we've passed. Looming above our heads is the education reform, and the governor's made it very clear he will not sign the budget unless there is a path forward for educational reform. So there are two maps that have gone through the process and begun to be considered by both the Senate Education Committee, and we have the other two Rutland senators on that committee, Dave Weeks and Terry Williams, and then the House has its own version of that. So Amy and Megan will provide an overview of the Vermont Chamber's legislative priorities, along with some insight into how this session is doing, and I think Amy's going to come up first. So thank you all, it's great to see you, and Amy Spear, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everybody. Testing that you can hopefully hear this. I'm really excited to be here today, not only as the president of the Vermont Chamber, but as someone that lives here in Rutland County. I don't know if any of you have a plant addiction like I do, thanks to Greenspell downtown. But I walk your streets, I see all the developments that you're making here as a community, and I champion them not only as a resident of Rutland County, but also when I'm up in the State House as well. I often say you should really see what they've got going on down in Rutland. So just a little bright spot to start the day. So at the Vermont Chamber, our mission is to advance the Vermont economy through advocacy, community, and resources. But we also bring clarity through our data-informed legislative agenda. But our role today is to not talk, my role today is to be really Megan's warm-up act, is my joke. But the legislative session really isn't just about individual bills moving through committees. It's about something much bigger. It's about whether Vermont is moving forward toward affordability and abundance, or whether we're allowing structural pressures to quietly compound. And I know I don't need to tell this room what those pressures feel like. Businesses across the region and the state are navigating workforce shortages, housing constraints, healthcare costs, education funding volatility, and regulatory complexity. I would say we know those are not isolated frustrations. They're really interconnected forces. They show up in your payroll, in your insurance bills, your hiring challenges, in your expansion decisions. So rather than walking through a list of bills this morning, I want to zoom out a little bit first. Let's talk about the larger economic architecture that's shaping this legislative session. So first, looking at our structural reality as a state. The Vermont Futures Project Economic Action Plan was shaped by more than 5,000 Vermonters across all 14 counties. The message was remarkably consistent. Affordability is the defining concern of our time. And affordability is not just about taxes. It's about demographics. It's about workforce supply, it's about housing production, it's about whether our core systems are financially sustainable. Right now, Vermont faces a structural workforce gap of roughly 13,500 people per year over the next decade. At the same time, we need to significantly accelerate housing production just to stabilize the market. If we do nothing, the math is working against us. A smaller working age population supporting rising system costs creates pressures that show up everywhere, in property taxes, in healthcare premiums, in labor shortages, and that's what I call the scarcity pathway, and we're living it right now. The alternative is disciplined strategic growth. There are businesses, there are legislators that care about businesses in Montpelier. We see that every day, and we wish there were more. We say, Rutland County, keep doing what you're doing. You have a great delegation up in Montpelier. But growing the working age population, increasing labor force participation, modernizing systems, creating a predictable, competitive business climate, that is the abundance pathway, and that is the pathway that Vermont needs to be on. And the decisions that are made this session will either move us towards one or the other. Now let's talk a little bit about measuring competitiveness. One thing I've learned is that leaned into is that we need to measure. It's not about guesswork anymore. We need to have a data-informed path that we can get on. And that's why we launched the Vermont Competitiveness Dashboard. It benchmarks Vermont against peer states across cost structure, workforce participation, housing supply, and regulatory burden. And the data is very clear. We consistently rank near the bottom on cost competitiveness. That is not about criticism, it's about clarity. If we want to compete for talent, for capital, for entrepreneurs deciding where to launch or expand, policy must align with our economic reality. Data does not solve problems on its own, though, but it does remove the comfort of ambiguity. I think can turn into I know. So what are businesses telling us across the state? Probably none of this is going to be a surprise to anybody in this room. Through our annual business climate survey, employers consistently identified the same pressures: healthcare costs, education funding instability, housing shortages, regulatory unpredictability, and workforce availability. What stands out is not just that list, it is the consistency. Year after year, those themes do not change, and that tells us something very important. These are not temporary frustrations tied to one legislative session. They are structural pressures requiring structural reform, and that is the lens that we bring into every single hearing room. This year's session opened under significant fiscal pressure. The governor's budget proposal has landed. Megan will talk a little bit more about what's moving. Committees are walking through the budget decisions under very tight constraints, and at the same time, there are millions of dollars in additional funding requests layered on top. The core tension is very straightforward. Limited resources today, combined with long-term affordability challenges tomorrow. Healthcare remains a major pressure point. Many of you are paying thousands of dollars more per month than you were just a few years ago. Committees are reviewing reform proposals, including discussions around association health plans and broader system sustainability. And the real question is whether or not costs are rising. You know they are. You live that every single day. The question is whether we can begin bending the cost curve in a durable way. Skipping ahead just a little bit here, what's the Chamber's role? Why are we here today talking to everybody in this room? So our differentiator is not simply that we go in the room and we testify, it's that we work on connecting the dots. The economic action plan that I referenced earlier sets the long-term direction for our state. It's our economic blueprint. The competitiveness dashboard measures our progress against all 50 states. The business climate survey captures employer reality, and our government affairs team translates that into legislative strategy. That integration allows us to move beyond reaction toward leadership, and none of that happens alone. I would say none of that is isolated either. Our work is only possible because of the strength of our government affairs team. So a little bit about who our team is in the State House working on behalf of business. Megan Sullivan is our Vice President of Government Affairs. She leads our overall advocacy strategy across committees and policy domains. She coordinates engagement on healthcare, housing, workforce, environmental policy, and economic development. You name it, she is in the committee room. And works directly with legislative leadership to ensure that our member priorities are clearly understood. And I remain engaged on fiscal policy, taxation, hospitality-related issues. So whether it's liquor liability, insurance, or the meals and rooms tax, that's something that I work on, particularly as they relate to affordability and competitiveness. Jeremy Little is our policy associate. He manages our legislative intern program. We have 8 paid interns in the State House this session, expanding our monitoring capacity. Jeremy is in the building from the first gavel to adjournment alongside Megan, ensuring nothing moves without our awareness. And one more person to our team on complex technology issues, including data privacy. We work with Josh Diamond of Dinsey of Council, ensuring that Vermont's approach to innovation reflects practical business realities. Megan will dive a little bit more into the inside baseball, we call it, as she gets up here in just a moment. But together, the structure allows us to combine real-time presence with strategic engagement. It allows us to not be just reactive, but to be proactive in our approach. And with that, I will turn to Megan to walk through where things stand right now in Montpelier and what employers here in Rutland County need to be paying attention to. So Megan.
Off to you. Good morning. It is wonderful to be in Rutland County. I'm going to walk around a little bit because I've got this thing and I am a mover and a shaker. So as Amy said, my name is Megan Sullivan. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Chamber. So I spend the session in Montpelier with these wonderful folks that you all send there to represent you. And then outside of the session, I'm talking to our members, continuing to talk to legislators, working on ideas, and getting feedback on how things are going so we can bring those stories into the State House with us. I've been with the Chamber for 4 years now. Before that, I ran the Vermont Economic Progress Council and brought John Russell into that fun environment. And before that was with then Congressman Welch, where I got to spend a lot of time in Rutland County. So I want to set the stage for what this session, how it started. We're going into our 8th week. This is the 2nd year of a biennium. So you elect people for 2 years, and legislation can last those whole 2 years. It doesn't sort of start fresh every year. So we're seeing some things come up this year that got started last year, but also seeing lots of new things come up this year as well. This is a biennium where neither the House or the Senate have a supermajority, which means that while the Democratic Party has a majority in both the House and the Senate, they don't have a veto-proof majority. So that if the governor vetoes a bill, that veto can be upheld by just voting members of his own party. So that really changes the dynamics of what is happening in the State House this year compared to last biennium. Because it means that when you have representatives and senators who are asking thoughtful questions about possibly new tax proposals, that it's a sign that folks really need to listen to that, because if the questions are getting asked in the committee, that question might be asked in the governor's office as well. So it's really changed the dynamic for the most part, though I think we're going to talk about some things today where we also say, like, did the message really get through that is no longer a veto-proof majority? But we're there. What I try to say is we don't play bumper sticker politics at the Vermont Chamber. We dig into the details of a bill and try and help shape it in a way that helps the economy, that moves businesses forward. And if there is a determination, whether it's a new tax or a new regulation, that we try and shape it in a way that it doesn't have unintended consequences. And as our reputation has grown, we get pulled into lots and lots of more issues. And at this point, in 7 weeks in, our team has testified 21 times this session, which is a lot when I was thinking about all of the different issues we've testified on. But that is to say, if there is an issue that is impacting your business and it's something people are working on in Montpelier, we want to know about it, because we're here to represent the businesses of Vermont, and we want you to grow. And your legislators want you to grow, because that also helps drive revenue at the state. Business is really good for anyone who's working on the Appropriations Committee that's getting lots of funding requests. So coming into this year, I think we've all heard about the loss of federal funds to the state. The dollars that came in during COVID are running out, and agencies are having to make really tough decisions. I think it may have been Representative Fagan at this breakfast a few years ago who mentioned the number of positions that were created during COVID. Something like 201 in 1 year of new limited service positions. Limited service means that those are supposed to go away. We're at that time when those positions are going away, and so even our agencies are saying, oh, but we've really gotten used to having those 201 positions. I know they were only supposed to be here to help with this one thing, but that's really tough. So our agencies are going to see a contraction, which means there's a contraction of services, as well as the folks who rely on state dollars. So a lot of nonprofits that have been used to seeing money coming in, we're not seeing that money in the budget. And with a large turnover in our legislature, that means people on the Appropriations Committee who came in during times of lots of money are having to say no for the first time. Not always a comfortable position to be in for anybody, to have to say no, especially when things, I think we all can say the intent of what this does is good, but we just can't afford to keep up that level of spending. Our budget over 6 years has gone from $5 billion to $9 billion. That is a big increase, and there's a reckoning that's happening right now. So that's sort of setting the tone, right? It's not a great environment when you have to say no to people, when you're looking at budget constraints, and when the governor has said, you can't solve this problem by taxing Vermonters more. Because those conversations are continuing to happen. Even when he's made it clear, no more. We cannot keep raising taxes. I'm going to talk about some of the taxes that are being discussed right now. A high income earner tax is on the table. Senate Finance is going to be spending a great deal of time talking about a high income earner tax this week. Sugar sweetened beverage tax on the table. Rooms and meals tax increase on the table. Gas tax on the table. Tax on cigarettes on the table. Local option tax on the table. So there, you can see there's a struggle going on to say, well, we don't really like to say no. So maybe we could just talk about these taxes, even though the governor said, absolutely not. We are not going to increase the gas tax. We're not going to add a high income earner tax. And these things are going to come up as we talk about some other things to say, how do we make sure these conversations are connected? From a business perspective, you all understand the pressures that you are under as a business and that your employees are under with the affordability crisis in this state. How hard it is to rent a home, how hard it is to buy a home, how hard it is to, my son has his first job last winter, and he got his paycheck, and I said, let's go through it. Let's talk about this paycheck. And he saw the taxes that were taken out, and he was like, I don't have childcare. I'm going to call Grandpa right now, and I hope he's enjoying that wine that he bought with that Social Security money I just paid. He was like outraged. He was outraged. It was like, good. I hope every employer, if they're employing a young person that hasn't really looked at their paycheck before, even if it's a digital one, say, print that paycheck out. Let's talk about it. Let's go through it so you can see the difference between the wages that you're earning and what you're allowed to take home and spend. And then you're told, well, we're taxing you on this so we can tell you what childcare you can use, and we're taxing you on this, and we can tell you which home you can afford to be in because you have to get a subsidized home because you don't have enough take-home pay to pay for home in Vermont, and we're not going to allow more housing to get built. These are important conversations to have so people sort of understand the choices or the implications that are being made by the choices that are made in Montpelier. Talk a little bit about healthcare because this has been a huge one for the business community as those costs have continued to grow and grow. So we've seen double-digit increases in healthcare premiums over year, except for last year where Vermont had, for the small group market, for small employers, the lowest premium increase of any state in the nation. Reason to celebrate, except that even with the lowest increase of any state in the nation, we still had the highest premiums of any state in the nation. So we were so far ahead that even when we were less last year, people still couldn't catch up with how high our premiums are. This is a huge competitiveness challenge, right? Because our employers rely on employees who want to be in Vermont. We also have a lot of employers who employ people from New York or from New Hampshire or who rely on remote employees because you can't find the workforce here. And those folks, we're hearing more and more, are saying, my employees from New Hampshire have said, I'm out. I can't do this. I can get health insurance for so much less in New Hampshire. This is really taking so much out of my wages. I can't stay here. Even New York, and it's like, man, we're taxing more than New York. Like, this is brutal. And there's recognition that healthcare is a problem. So what is the solution, I think, is the challenge that we're facing. Last year, there was legislation to deal with the cost of hospitals that took $200 million out of the hospital system in Vermont statewide. This brought our premiums down But as you can imagine, think about your business. If you were to take something akin to a $200 million out of your business, it's a destabilizing impact. And our hospitals are incredibly important to our communities. So we have to be really careful as we're pointing the finger and saying, well, the hospitals are the problem. At the same time, we desperately need our hospitals to be functioning. And there are other issues in the system if we're saying, well, we have to take as much money out of our hospitals as humanly possible. Because if our hospitals, especially our rural hospitals, close, that has a destabilizing effect on so many of our community. So I think there's some work that's going on in our healthcare committees, both in the House and the Senate, to look beyond just, okay, let's stop pointing the finger at hospitals, we have to look broader. And things keep coming back to the same thing. Well, we need more workforce. If people had access to primary care, they wouldn't be using the hospitals for things that they should be able to get from a primary care physician. That context seems to be disconnected from the high-income earner tax. So we want physicians to come to Vermont. That's our goal. We're saying that workforce needs to be built up. In the other committee, we're saying, I know who we should tax, high-income earners. How do we attract physicians to come to Vermont? At the same time, we're saying we should tax them as much as we possibly can because they can afford it. They can also afford not to choose to live here. They can afford to live somewhere where they have access to housing, where they're welcomed and not saying, we're going to take as much out of your paycheck as possible because you're providing a service which clearly you have, $200,000 in loans to pay off, which is why you're getting paid so much. So there needs to be some connection in this conversation about how do we attract the workforce that we need and create the taxing environment, create the economic development environment that really does bring them in. Part of the conversation in healthcare that the governor has put forward is that reducing costs now for businesses, including bringing back association health plans. Association health plans allowed small businesses to go under one health plan that allowed them to look like a large business and access a lot of different plans than they have access to now. That went away in 2019. Went away first in 2012 under the American Care Act, then it came back, and then Vermont said, no way, we're getting rid of that altogether. We also got rid of community health rating, probably 2 decades ago, and that said everyone, regardless of age, should get the same rating for their health care. So as a business, if you're saying, well, I really want I want to encourage my employees to be healthy, to have a healthy lifestyle, maybe that'll help bring down our healthcare premiums. It won't, because regardless of your health status, your rating is the same as anyone else. There are some states in the country where the difference is 300%. So if you're 30 versus you're 60, and the idea is when you're 30, you haven't made that much money, you're less likely to use services. In Vermont, if you're 30 and you're paying the same as someone who's 60, and your premiums have gone up over and over and over again, you're probably less likely to take up healthcare. And as an employer, that can be really challenging, right? You want your employees to have healthcare. I don't know, I'm pointing over at the country store. I'm going to call you out for a second, because the Vermont Country Store has seen the problem of access to care and have gone so far as to say, we're going to have a free primary care service in our building, and we're not going to run it. They have someone else who runs it, but their employees have access to primary care services 4 days a week and 1 day a week to mental health services. They do that because they have to. So, on one hand, we're saying, well, we don't want company states, right? We want to get rid of that. We want to get rid of company towns. At the same time, we're saying, but we want employers to provide health care. They're going to have to provide health care because we're not going to solve the problems. We are going to need our employers to provide transportation. We're going to need our employers to provide housing, and we're going to need our employers to provide childcare. So on one hand, when we're saying, well, we don't want company towns, those are bad, we're also making a lot of choices that sort of force companies to have to help their employees with all of these things. And part of the solution is just to say, all right, what do the employees need to be able to be successful? What environment, what economic development are we creating that allows people to be successful without this much intervention? I'm not sure those conversations are happening enough, but I'm going to point out Senator Weeks, because he's asking those questions in Senate Economic Development, and they're really important. And I think I'm going to make a quick plug for your Rutland County delegation. If you take nothing else away from this, it's to make sure to thank them, because they're asking important questions. So they may not have the ability to choose what committees are looking at, because that's up to the committee chair, but they're asking really important questions in the committee that are saying, are we getting at the root cause of the problems? So when we're talking about healthcare, and we're saying we need physicians and they need to live here, okay, what does that mean? How are we doing that? How is this conversation related to that conversation? Obviously, another big piece of this year, and I think there's a lot of similarities between the healthcare conversation and the education conversation, right? These are large systems that impact the people we love the most, and they're pretty broken, right? They're unaffordable in that they are, our property taxes are to the point where people can't afford to live here anymore. And they're important systems, and change is really hard in them. So we're having these very similar conversations, and I think because I get to go around to lots of different committees, and Amy gets to go around to lots of different committees, we can sort of see how these things are tying together, of saying taking on these systems is really hard, and you want to try to not break things more, but at the same time we have to do something about affordability. So in education, the governor's been really clear, like, we need to do something now, which we did not get maps out of the task force that came. And so there are, thank you. So there are 2 maps that are being looked at. But simultaneously with the maps, we're also talking about a foundation formula. We're also talking about property tax buy down. We're talking about centers for technical education, right? Because we know those centers for technical education are doing an incredible job of creating students who will become leaders in the workforce of tomorrow. If any of you have had or haven't had an opportunity to go to your local CTE, if they ever have an open house, I recommend you do it. It is amazing to see how engaged the students are that are going through those programs, who can see the benefits of what they're learning and how that'll turn into a career. And if we can get that more ingrained into our school-wide system, it's incredibly important. And so we know our House Commerce Committee is having really important conversations about how do we build up our CTE program within this transformation that's going on in our education system. All of these conversations feel unfinished, right? So we're approaching crossover. So the bills have to leave. If they start in the House, they have to leave the House and head to the Senate. If they start in the Senate, they have to leave the Senate and head to the House by that point in time. Watching how these conversations are going, both in healthcare and education, it's feeling like it's going to be a busy couple of weeks here to try and get these things to a point where you're like, all right, well, I'm feeling like the House is really feeling good about this and sending it over to the Senate in a good spot, or the Senate's feeling really good about this and they're going to send it to the House because it's in a good spot. And I think part of that has led to a number of bills that seem less critical right now, because you can sort of check a box, right? When you've got these huge issues to deal with, if you can check a box on doing some other things, that can be helpful. But those small issues typically aren't as easy to deal with as you thought. And I'll give you an example of a bill that we talked about last week that I testified on, and it's in the House General Committee, that says if someone is out on workers' comp, they can't concurrently be out on family medical leave, because then they might come back from workers' comp and not have any family medical leave, and that's bad, so we're going to say you're not allowed to do that. And we're going to invite Megan Sullivan from the Chamber to testify on this. So, not being a bumper sticker organization, I'm like all of the rabbit holes. It's more like an ant underground ant system at this point with how much I'm looking into this. And I had to go in and say, listen, I speak for businesses, not for workers. But to be clear, this is not great for workers either, right? Like if you're out on workers' comp, you don't have job protection. Family medical leave provides job protection. It seemed like a really easy topic that they were taking up to say, we're going to hear from Megan, and then we're going to vote on this on Friday. And all of a sudden it was like, whoa, 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 these are very complicated systems that you are trying to really blow up right now. This is going to take a lot more than you thought. So now they're going to have to take testimony on this week. They're going to have to take testimony when they get back from town meeting day break to say, how do we do this? Can we do this? Who does this help? Who does this hurt? At the same time, it's challenging for injured workers. It's also challenging for businesses if you have someone who's been out on workers' comp for 2 years and you've tried to keep that position open for them, and they come back and they say, all right, I'm going to take the next 3 months off as well. That is incredibly hard to say, well, we're just going to do that because there is one instance that we got a email about that we think this will fix it. So these sort of issues that are coming up that seem like, well, we're going to check a box to say we did something, are way more complicated. And at the same time, this is the committee that's working on housing, which I think everyone can agree is a huge statewide challenge. Say, we need you to work on the hard things, even though they're really hard. And housing is hard this year because there's no money, as we've talked about. And for a lot of years, part of what we've done with housing is say we're going to put money in. We're going to put hundreds of millions of dollars into housing. I think we're up to $500 million, $750 million of dollars that we've put into housing. I'm not sure anyone would say that we're better now than we were then. And I think that's because we can say, like, money can't solve this problem. This isn't necessarily about how much it costs or how much money we're going to put into a house. And if an affordable, big A affordable, right, subsidized affordable unit of housing costs $600,000 for a one-bedroom apartment, there's something broken. And if that's being subsidized by taxpayer dollars, we need to really dig into what that broken thing is. In the economic action plan that the Vermont Futures Project did, they broke down what goes into the cost of a unit, and $170,000 goes to permitting and regulation. So we're subsidizing it, and then we're taking a whole bunch of it back through our permits and regulation. There's bills to say we need to have the highest, best energy codes in the nation. Like, we can't have a wall that's this thick. We need walls that are this thick. If you're living in a tent, do you really think this thick versus this thick matters? And yet we don't necessarily see voices showing up and saying, this is going way too far. We don't need that. We need to be thinking first about what is the cost of a unit and what are we doing to add. If we're saying every contractor who's working on a house has to be energy certified, all right, well, someone has to pay for that certification. That certification goes into the cost of the house. So these are important conversations to try and link up of saying, if you want to keep subsidizing affordable housing, the first thing we have to do is figure out what are the costs going into it. We can't have that conversation without talking about Act 250. So 2 years ago, Act 250 reform went through that changed how Act 250 worked from being the size of the development to the location of the development and saying, you know, we actually want to encourage development in our village centers and our downtowns, and Act 250 is a deterrent for that. We should exempt those areas from Act 250. And if there are critical natural resources where someone can build a mile-long driveway and put a mansion on without going Act 250, like, well, why are they getting out of it, but then those 50 units in the downtown are going through it? And so the idea here was to create a process to say, all right, how do we reform this? How do we create places that make sense for regulation? It was a huge bill. It went through incredible changes the last 2 years, the last 2 weeks of the session, and created a new board, the Land Use Review Board. And we supported the bill, and it created interim exemptions of saying, until we get this figured out, we're going to just say these areas are exempt from Act 250. Which is great, because as we've seen things roll out, sort of worst case scenario, I would say. And I think Devin Neary is here, or he was here. Worst case scenario of saying, how do we conserve as much as possible and make our growth areas as small as possible? And Rutland got to go through it first. Devin's maps went through it first of saying, make it smaller, make it smaller, make it smaller. Put more into rural conservation. And now the Land Use Review Board is saying, well, we may have gone overboard in Rutland. We should probably let them know that. This literally testimony last week. We should probably let them know we're actually going to move away from that. Like, okay, let's put the pause on all of this, because you can't be telling Rutland one thing and then be telling Chittenden County something else, and then be telling Addison County something else, right? If this is about making a statewide plan, you've got to know from the beginning what is expected of you. So right now there is a bill being worked on in Senator Williams' committee, Senate Natural, to say, all right, it was a huge bill that went through 2 years ago. How do we slow it down and make sure that this is working as intended, so that in growth areas, people are able to build housing without going through Act 250, or without the threat of what can happen when you go through Act 250 in terms of appeals. And make sure that the Land Use Review Board fully understands the intent of what was passed, because there are things that we expected to be considered that are not being considered. And at the same time, I know our support for a 5-person professional board was to do a decade worth of deferred maintenance at the district commission level. Because some district commissions, when they review Act 250, and district coordinators are delightful. And when I talk to my members about it, they're like, oh, it's great to work with this coordinator. They see what we're trying to do. They want to help us. They help us through the process. It's easy. And then there are other places where that is not the case. And while the outcomes, while there's different flavors for different parts of Vermont, it should be fair and it should be predictable. And we have 5 highly paid individuals who are now in place to ensure that every office in Vermont is fair and predictable. And what I'm hearing is it's getting worse, which is not great. And it's especially not great for Rutland County. And so part of the slowdown of what's happening with the bill on Act 250 on 181 is saying, you need to spend some time doing this work. And so we're going to extend the interim exemptions. We're going to hit pause on Tier 3. We're going to hit pause on the road roll for really good reasons. And there was a report that the Land Use Review Board said, give us appeals. Let us handle appeals rather than the court. We're going to not take that up right now, because there's really important work that they need to do in their commission offices with their district coordinators on what they term as deferred maintenance to make sure that we're getting through. So that bill is coming up. I'll be testifying that. See you on Wednesday. To say how are we making sure everything that we need to do in this bill is happening. I think there are some other housing bills that are getting talked about, but they're going to be smaller, right? There isn't that amount of money that there was years ago. And frankly, we've had some of the big A affordable housing folk come to us and say, we really could use your support. And my response is, I hear you. I know the work that you're doing is really important, and the work that's happening in this community is really important. But I need your support on how we bring down the cost, because I can't go to my members and say, they're talking about taxing you more, and they're going to try and raise $2 billion, which at $600,000 a unit, my math isn't fast, but that's not a lot of units, right? If you help me bring down the cost, if you say that $200,000 in regulation that we're paying per unit is exorbitant, then you can talk to me about how do we then move forward. But everyone needs to be part of that conversation of how do we bring down the cost of regulation. At the end of the day, we shouldn't have programs that you have to exempt people from. That these are working so poorly, they are saying, well, we just shouldn't have to go through it. And I think that's part of the deferred maintenance. There's a lot of other regulations. So the governor's executive order talked about, did you say it? What's that? He paused the regs, and wetlands, sorry. Wetlands. And so now there's conversation about, well, we have to protect our wetlands. Like, well, the executive order didn't say you could build in wetlands, it just made the buffer zone smaller. What we're seeing is there's so much regulation. The competitiveness dashboard, which we can make sure Crispin has the address for that, shows that Vermont is the 7th most regulated state. And it can be hard, right? We can say, like, we have to stop regulating. And we're working on a number of bills that are going to add regulation this year. Because these things are sort of done in silos. Like, well, if we regulate this over here to solve this problem, and we'll regulate this over here to solve this problem, when it all comes down to it, that means employers have a lot, developers have a lot that they have to undertake. So something that we're going to do at the Chamber is work with a group who's done this in other states to do a really deep dive into Vermont's regulatory system. Talk about where is there duplication? What does the statute say versus what rules say? And I'm sure gentlemen over here who are dealing with an issue where A&R has gone 10 times as far as the legislature did on regulation can agree. It's not always coming from Montpelier. Oh, time to wrap. Okay, it's not always coming from Montpelier. It can be coming from our agencies too. And so we're going to be digging into the work of not just showing up at the State House and representing businesses there, but also working with our regulatory agencies to say, what are you doing that goes beyond what the legislature has asked you to do, that is making it harder to do business in Vermont, and making sure that that voice is showing up in the regulatory world as well. I want to let you know about 2 days that are coming up, because while we're there every day, it's also helpful to have you all there if you can make it. You can come anytime. The legislature, the State House is open. People are happy to see you. Your legislators would all be thrilled to have you there. We're thrilled to have you there. April 2nd, we're going to be hosting Manufacturing Day. So if any of you are manufacturers, we'd love for you to come or support manufacturing. We'd love for you to come to the State House for Manufacturing Day. We'll be sending out more information about what that day is going to entail. And April 16th is Tourism Economy Day. So if you work in the tourism economy, and you can come on April 16th. We're going to be talking about bills. We'll be meeting with legislators, but they're going to be 2 great days to represent Vermont businesses at the State House, and we'll be there to support you every step of the way. For those of you that are here that are members of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, we appreciate your support. We can't do it without you. It's great to have partnership with organizations like CEDRR, who are doing incredible things for you locally. We're here for you in the State House, and happy to talk more. My email and my cell phone number are on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy and Megan. We have a few minutes and want to open it up for questions and answers. Anyone have a question for, and I see Tom Donahue's hand. Just one moment.
Thank you, Crispin. That's Donahue with an A, D-O-N-A-H-U-E. So, Megan, I just wanted to mention 2 things. When you talked about workforce availability, one of the crucial things I think in that equation is our daycares. So I want to just kind of give them a shout out. I think they're some of the heroes in our equation. They're not only small business people, but they are providing the opportunity for parents, both parents, to bring their skill set back to the workforce. So I do want to see us continue to be supporting the creation of daycares when right now it's going in the other direction. And that is a potential problem for continuing our growth in our workforce.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I think when we talk about regulation, we can't leave out how much regulation our daycares, our child care centers have to go through I mean, if you have to hire an admin person just to do the paperwork, that can be really challenging if you're a small startup, if you're trying to build something out of your home. So I think that has to be part of the conversation. But absolutely, as we support our workforce, we have to look at what are all of the struggles that folks are facing in order to get to work every day.
And the second, and it'll be a little city-centric here, under Act 181, I was, of course, happy that we are enjoying currently the exemption from housing under Act 250 in Rutland City, for a good portion of it being unlimited, and then a portion outside of that being 75 units or less. That's been advantageous to us. I do want to see us achieve that Tier 1 exemption potentially this summer so that we can do the same for housing, commercial development, and industrial development. That's critical for Rutland to achieve that for our own future in development and avoid all the things you're talking about with Act 250, which ironically, when I ran the Chamber of Commerce for over 20 years here, we're still having that same conversation, Megan, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yeah, these conversations never seem to quite end.
So I'll just wrap up with this one thing. Under Act 181, we're talking about extending the exemption, at least as it applies to housing, beyond January 1st, 2027. I think that's really, really important. I know that number 2030 has come up, and I think that is an important thing to address for all of Vermont, given the housing deficit the state is experiencing. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks. Yeah, and we are asking for 2030, and I will say VNRC, sort of a conservation group in Vermont, has also said they would agree to 2030 as an exemption. That there should be some overlap between when you get that Tier 1 status and then when those exemptions go away, because it's going to take a minute to get everything set.
It's great that this is being extended hopefully for this Act 181, not only for development, because we need all the development we can get here in Rutland and the state as a whole to create a bigger tax base, with all the expenses, but also even for the landowners. This Act 181 reaches beyond where we own a fair amount of land, and it really puts a big restriction on us, what we're going to be able to do with our land between Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, from what we're doing already. And I guess unless the state is going to give us a credit on our property taxes, it is going to be a devalue to us.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone could hear that, but that was talking about 181 and the impact that it can have on landowners. And I will say, I think it's important that especially large landowners are having a voice in the conversation, that you're talking to your legislators, asking to testify to make sure that that voice is heard, right? We represent businesses, we're representing businesses who need thousands of homes for their employees. So our focus is how do we make sure that we have growth centers that are big enough to accommodate that. But all Vermonters need to have a voice in this, and that's why you have such a strong delegation to be able to bring that voice to any legislation that comes out to make sure that there aren't adverse impacts.
I've spoken to a lot of them already.
Good.
Any other questions? Long legs. Yeah.
Roy Newton, and I own a newspaper, as many of you know, and I would like to take a couple of different directions. Well, actually, I got a number of subjects. Number one is 22A, okay? We had the Rutland Regional Planning Commission come out and stop at my house. You hearing this, okay? At my house in Castleton, okay? I don't know why they stopped there, but they all unloaded from a bus, okay, and started talking about planning in Castleton. Why they stopped at my house, I'll never know, okay? They did not go out to Route 22A, which is one of the most important problems in the state of Vermont right now. And the legislature is not speaking to this. They need to go down the end of Long Hill next summer, and they need to construct 2 miles of that road to start making it safer. all the way to Ferrisburg. It's one of the most dangerous roads in the state of Vermont. Last week, 2 weeks ago, there's been 2 accidents and 9 minors have been sent to the hospital. Rutland Regional Planning, okay, their document is 340 pages or 430 pages, okay? I've tried to get through it myself, okay? And that is going to go into implementation next summer, I believe. They're having hearings on it now. And the people don't even get the chance to see it unless they go to some website. That document ought to be voted on by the people, okay? And you talk about land, taking your land, that document, you ought to see what it does to restrictions on property and growth areas and everything else outside of Rutland City. I guess I've said enough. Thank you.
Hi. It is on. My name is Devin Karpek. I'm the tech head instructor at Otter Valley. One of my questions was that from my standpoint, like I've had relationships with Crispin, the Markowskis, and Omya and several other. One of the things from the education standpoint that I'm finding this is more of an ask for us to help connect our students to your doors is if the chamber and different entities like already Workforce in Motion is doing it in Rutland County, but I think from a statewide perspective, we have a lot of duplication, as you're pointing out, where it's costing money time and time again, is that if there is some way that we can create either collectively or a clearinghouse of organizations throughout the state so that we can connect with you and so that we know that what opportunities our kids have so that we can make sure that we're preparing them the best we can to make it to your doors. Stafford does a fantastic job. I'm not saying that, but like from my standpoint, like I sometimes don't know what's out there to tell my kids, and we have a passion issue on a day in, day out, because a kid finds out they're bad at math when they're sitting at a table, but you stand them up and put them in a shop. They find that it's real easy, and connecting that to a job is so important. So I would say within Rutland County, we're doing a decent job. We can continue to grow that, but throughout the state, I would love to see more communication to be able to, what's out there to get these kids to want to stay instead of being like, oh, that was a mistake. I didn't know I could have done that cool thing. So thank you again.
Yeah, and I would love to connect with you on this. Maybe this isn't. Would love to connect with you on this as well. We're part of an initiative called the Preparing the Future Workforce, and it really is all about education, personal finance. What is it like to work in the business world? And it's for CTE settings and traditional high school settings, and it's about connecting employers to the students as well. And I would also encourage you, businesses love being connected to students, and it's so critical to have that early intervention to make sure people can see themselves within the workforce, whatever their position in the workforce might be. And as a state, when you look at educational attainment to career satisfaction, the sweet spot for our state is actually the 2-year degree. So that is where there's the best long-term educational attainment to job satisfaction. So encourage everyone here to really talk to your CTEs, be integrated with them, and something that we're watching and engaging in as well, because that pipeline is critically important.
And we have time for probably one more question, so I see one here.
Speaking of road safety, I would like to put a plug in to reduce the speed limit going over the pass and Killington into Mendon. Thank you.
I'm not sure that's something that I can do at the state level, but when they make me czar, you know it.
I just wanted to respond to the comment in the back there. Workforce in Motion is pretty new, but we're working very hard to connect with all the schools, all the CTEs, all the chambers. I met with Amy last week. I met with Kevin Chu from Vermont Futures Project. the goal is going to continue to be to spread this around the state. I just have to crawl before I walk, before I run. But nonetheless, with all the people that are working on this collectively, and even all the businesses that are present in this room that are sponsoring, participating in the events that we're doing, the more that we can all work together, the goal is to make that workforce in motion a conduit or a pipeline for all those fibers to run through to get to all of the schools, to get to all of the employers, and to get to the state level. So more to come on that. Just keep your eyes peeled.
You want to talk about it? So again, like to thank all of you for joining us this morning. Like to thank Amy and Megan for coming up and just sharing information about a lot of these timely issues that are going on up at the state level. And if you have any questions, you like to hang around and chit-chat with people, feel free to do so. I'd like to thank our legislators for joining us, OMIA, our sponsor, and I'd like to thank Southside Steakhouse for again, allowing us to host this event. And look forward to planning another legislative breakfast sometime in the spring. So let's look forward to some warmer weather. Thank you all and have a great week.